Smoke and fire covered the broken battlefield. The alien girl stumbled on the ground, her arms tied, her body weak from hunger and wounds. She heard heavy boots behind her, each step echoing like thunder in her ears. She knew the sound. Humans. Her people had told her terrible stories of them. They were said to kill without mercy, to burn villages, to crush prisoners until nothing was left. She could not even lift her head. Fear froze her body. The human soldier pulled her closer. She waited for pain, for a strike across her face or a blade through her chest. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst. She closed her eyes. If she could not see the blow, maybe it would hurt less. Death was certain. She braced herself for it. But the blow never came. Instead, something warm touched her shoulder. A hand. Gentle. Careful. She opened her eyes in shock. The soldier was kneeling beside her, his face covered in dirt and blood, his helmet dented. His eyes were sharp but not cruel. He whispered something she did not understand. His voice low, steady, almost calm. Her body trembled harder. Why would he touch her like this? Humans were killers. She expected pain, but he only loosened the rope around her wrists. She gasped, pulling her arms back quickly, waiting for a trick, but none came. He pushed a small container toward her. Water. She stared at it with wide eyes, unable to believe it. Her throat burned with thirst, but she did not move. What if it was poisoned? What if it was a game to make her suffer more? The soldier opened the container himself, drank from it, then placed it back in her hands. Her chest tightened. This was not what her elders had told her. They had warned her of monsters, not men who shared water. Her lips were dry, her body weak. Finally, she lifted the container and drank. Cold water touched her tongue, and she felt life return for a moment. She almost cried. The soldier watched silently, not moving closer. His silence was strange. No insults, no laughter at her weakness, only quiet eyes that seemed tired, almost sad. She pressed her back against the broken wall, clutching the water to her chest. Every sound around them made her jump. The battlefield was still alive with distant screams and gunfire. Why was he not dragging her away? Why was he not ending her life quickly? He just sat near her, scanning the shadows with his weapon ready, like he was guarding her. Her mind twisted in confusion. Could this be a trap? Perhaps he wanted her to relax before hurting her. She bit her lip until it bled, trying to stay awake, trying not to trust, but when her body swayed, too tired to hold on, his hand caught her before she fell. Again, it was gentle. He laid her against the stone, careful not to worsen her wounds. She stared at his hands. Big, scarred, strong enough to crush her throat in seconds. Yet they moved softly, like they had learned how to heal instead of harm. He tore a piece of cloth from his uniform and wrapped it around the cut on her arm. She wanted to resist, but her body was too weak. She watched, stunned, as a human soldier stopped her bleeding instead of causing it. Her people had told her humans were made of fire, but this one's touch felt like warmth. For the first time since her capture, her fear began to change. It did not vanish, but it broke into pieces. She tried to speak, but no words came out, only a whisper of breath. He did not demand speech. He did not force anything. He only nodded as if to say she was safe, at least for now. The night grew colder. Smoke thinned into the sky, and the stars glimmered faintly above the broken ruins. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the man who should have been her executioner. He leaned back against the wall, his weapon across his lap, his head tilting slightly as if sleep tempted him. She should have run, but her legs would not move. Instead, she watched him, wondering what he truly was, monster or protector. Her heart did not know the answer. It beat fast, not only from fear, but from something she had never felt before. It was strange, dangerous, and confusing. She whispered to herself, her voice so low that even he could not hear. "Why? Are you not killing me?" The human did not reply. He only adjusted his jacket, removed it, and placed it lightly over her shoulders. The weight of it shocked her. She gripped the fabric, feeling the warmth still trapped inside. No soldier had ever given her comfort. No soldier had ever treated her as if she mattered. She wanted to fight the feeling rising in her chest, but the gentle act broke through her defenses. Tears filled her eyes, hot and unwanted. She turned her face away, not wanting him to see. She was supposed to hate humans. She was supposed to fear them until her last breath. Yet here she sat alive, covered in the jacket of her enemy, wondering if she had been wrong her whole life. Her body slowly relaxed against her will. The fear did not vanish completely, but it no longer owned her. The gentle touch on her shoulder, the water in her hands, the jacket around her body, these things stayed inside her mind like fire in the dark. She knew nothing would ever be the same again. Tonight, death had not come from human hands. Something else had. Something she could not name. The ground was uneven as he pulled her forward, but his grip was not cruel. She stumbled once, expecting a shove, yet instead he slowed his pace to match hers. The broken city stretched around them, silent except for distant gunfire, echoing through the night. He guided her toward a half-collapsed building, pushing aside rubble so she could pass through without cutting her feet. Inside, the air was cold and filled with dust, but it was shelter. She sat on a cracked stone, watching him carefully, every muscle in her body tense. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small square of human food. The smell was strange, sharp and salty. He tore off a piece and ate it in front of her, chewing slowly, then offered the rest to her. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but suspicion held her back. Poison, tricks, humiliation, these were the lessons her people had taught. But his eyes did not mock her. They only waited. At last, she took the food with shaking fingers. It was dry, hard, almost tasteless, yet she devoured every crumb. He gave her another without a word. When she coughed from swallowing too quickly, he handed her the water again. She drank, more confident this time, and wiped her mouth with her arm. He sat opposite her, leaning against the wall with his weapon resting across his knees. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the wind. She expected him to question her, to demand answers about her people, but he did nothing. He only watched the shadows, as if protecting her from what lurked outside. Her gaze traveled over him. His uniform was torn, his arm bleeding where shrapnel had cut through the fabric. He did not tend to it, did not even flinch. She frowned, confused. Why save her if he could not even save himself? Slowly, without knowing why, she reached into her pouch where she kept a few healing herbs. Her people used them on wounds to stop the bleeding. She crushed them in her palm and moved closer, her heart racing. He tensed when she raised her hand, his eyes sharp, ready for an attack. But she placed the herbs against his wound, pressing them gently to the skin. He stared at her, surprised. For a moment, neither moved. His breathing slowed, then he gave a small nod of thanks. She expected anger for touching him, but instead he allowed it. She wrapped a strip of cloth from her own sleeve around his arm. The moment was fragile, but it was real. Her people had said humans never accepted help, that they took and took until nothing remained. Yet here was a man who let her heal him, who drank from the same container and shared his food. She tried to pull away, but his hand touched her wrist lightly, not to stop her, only to hold her for a second. She froze. His hand was rough with scars, but his grip was careful, almost respectful. He released her quickly, as though afraid to scare her. The firelight from a distant burning building flickered through the cracks, painting his face in shadows. She studied him in silence. He looked worn, older than his years, as if every battle had carved lines into him. There was no hatred in his eyes, only exhaustion and something else she could not name. For the first time, she wondered if he too carried fears, if humans also whispered stories about monsters when they spoke of her people. Her body was still weak, but she no longer felt like prey. The ropes around her wrists were gone, replaced by a strange freedom she did not understand. He could have kept her bound, but he had not. He could have beaten her for daring to touch him, but he had not. She tried to remind herself that this was her enemy, yet each small act of kindness made the truth harder to hold. She hugged her knees and looked away, fighting the confusion inside. Trust was dangerous. Trust could kill her. But when her eyes closed for a moment, sleep threatening to drag her down, she felt the weight of something soft over her shoulders. She opened her eyes and saw his jacket once again, placed around her without a word. He returned to his place by the wall, watching the night as if he had never moved. Her heart beat fast, but not with terror this time. She pulled the jacket closer, hiding her face in its warmth. The fear of death had not vanished completely, yet it was now joined by another feeling she could not explain. Something fragile, something terrifying in its own way, something that made her chest ache as much as her wounds. She stared at him through the darkness, whispering words only she could hear. Why are you saving me?" Dawn broke slowly, painting the ruins in pale light. The soldier moved first, rising from where he had kept watch all night. His eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and unyielding. She followed him reluctantly, her legs heavy but steadier than before. Every few steps, she looked back, certain he would strike when her guard fell. Yet each time she stumbled, his hand reached out, not to harm, but to steady. The road ahead was a graveyard of steel and ash. Burned vehicles lay scattered, twisted like broken bones. Smoke rose in the distance, carrying the bitter smell of war. She walked carefully, her body tense, while he stayed just ahead, checking every shadow, every ruined doorway. His silence was strange. No threats, no chains, no harsh commands. Only a quiet focus, as though keeping her alive was his duty. When a low growl cut through the silence, she froze. Out of the rubble crept a beast with black scales and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. Its long tongue flickered, tasting the air, its claws scratching the ground. She gasped, her body refusing to move. The creature leapt forward with a hiss. She raised her arms, certain she would die. But the soldier was faster. He shoved her aside and drew his blade in a single movement. The clash was brutal. The beast roared as steel cut through its hide, snapping its jaws inches from his throat. Blood sprayed across the stones. He grunted, his muscles straining, his feet sliding in the dust. She wanted to scream, but no sound left her lips. Another strike, another desperate block, until finally his blade pierced the creature's chest. It shuddered once and collapsed at his feet, smoke rising from its wounds. He stood above it, panting, his arm trembling from the effort. The ground around him was stained with fresh blood, some his, some the beast's. He wiped his blade and looked back at her. His face was calm, but she could see the pain in the way he held his side. Still, he said nothing. He only motioned for her to continue walking. Her heart pounded. She stared at him in disbelief. He had fought with no shield, no thought of his own life, only to protect hers. He was her enemy, yet his body carried wounds meant for her. She could not stop the thought that struck her like lightning. If he wanted her dead, he could have let the beast do it. But he had not. They continued on through the broken land, her mind spinning with questions. Every time she lagged behind, he slowed. Every time a sound made her flinch, he raised his weapon first. He moved like a wall of iron between her and the dangers of the world. She began to see not a captor, but a shield, though she hated herself for thinking it. When they reached a stream, he bent to fill the container and handed it to her first. She drank, staring at his reflection in the water. His face was lined with fatigue, but there was no cruelty there, only a strange weight she could not name. She wanted to ask why, to demand his reason, but the words burned in her throat. Her people had told her humans thrived on blood and conquest, yet the man who walked ahead of her bled for her safety, gave her food, gave her water, fought monsters so she could breathe another day. She felt the walls inside her begin to crack, though she tried to hold them together. As night returned, they found shelter under a broken arch of stone. He sat by the entrance, weapon in hand, eyes never closing. She sat in the shadows, hugging his jacket close. The memory of the beast's roar still rang in her ears, but louder than that was the sound of his voice when he had shouted to warn her, the sound of his body crashing into hers, to push her from danger. Her heart whispered a truth she was not ready to face. She felt safer beside him than she ever had among her own. The night was colder than before, the wind sharp as it slipped through the broken stones. She sat in silence, her arms wrapped around her knees, but her eyes never left him. He leaned against the wall, his weapon across his lap, his head tilted forward as if sleep fought to claim him. The cut on his arm had reopened, blood soaking through the rough cloth she had wrapped earlier. He did not move to stop it, as though pain was nothing new to him. Her chest tightened. Every instinct told her to stay still, to remain distant, but another voice whispered louder. If he fell, she would be alone. Slowly, she crawled closer, her hands trembling. He stirred at the sound, and his eyes snapped open, sharp and alert. For a moment, fear froze her, but she did not back away. She reached for his arm, her small pouch of herbs clutched in her hand. He frowned, suspicious, but when she pressed the crushed leaves gently onto his wound, his eyes softened. He did not speak, only watched her as she worked. She tore a strip from her own clothing to bind the injury tighter, tying the knot with care. His breath hitched once, not from anger, but from the sting of the herbs. She almost pulled back, afraid she had done something wrong, but then she saw his lips curve into something unexpected. A smile. It was faint, tired, almost hidden, but it was there. Her heart lurched in confusion. No human had ever smiled at her like that. The fire outside the ruins flickered, casting shadows across his face. In that moment, he looked less like a soldier and more like a man who had carried too much weight for too long. She realized then that he was just as broken as the ruins around them, but still standing, still fighting. For reasons she could not explain, she wanted to keep him standing. He reached out suddenly, and she stiffened, but his hand only brushed her wrist, resting there for a heartbeat before slipping away. The touch was not forceful. It was quiet, almost grateful. She turned her face quickly, hiding the heat rising in her cheeks. This was madness. He was her enemy. Yet every action, every look, every small kindness pulled her further from the hatred she had been taught. The silence between them grew heavy, but not like before. It was no longer sharp with fear. It felt fragile, almost delicate, as though one wrong move might shatter something unspoken between them. She dared to glance at him again and found his gaze still on her. Not hard, not cruel, watchful, curious. Her lips parted, words trembling at the edge, but she swallowed them down. She could not ask what he meant to her. She could not even answer it herself. All she knew was that when the wind howled outside, she pressed his jacket tighter around her shoulders and felt safe. Safe in the presence of the one she had feared most. As his breathing steadied and his eyes finally closed, she stayed awake, watching over him in return. It felt wrong. It felt dangerous. And yet for the first time in her life, it also felt right. The sound of voices cut through the ruins before dawn. She stirred, her body tensing as shadows moved in the distance. He was already awake, weapon raised, his face sharper than she had ever seen. The footsteps grew louder until shapes emerged from the dust. Other humans. Soldiers in full gear, their helmets reflecting the pale morning light. They saw her instantly, and their voices hardened. One of them pointed at her, shouting words she barely understood, but the meaning was clear. Prisoner, enemy, execution. She froze, her body curling in on itself, waiting for the end. The soldier beside her stepped forward, placing himself between her and his own people. Their weapons shifted toward him, confusion flashing across their faces. They barked orders, demanding he move, but he did not. Her chest heaved. She had been ready for death many times before, but not like this. Not when someone stood in front of her, shielding her with his own body. She waited for him to step aside, to hand her over, to reveal that all of this kindness had been a cruel game. Instead, he shouted back at them, his voice sharp with defiance. She did not understand every word, but she heard the tone. He would not allow them to touch her. The air thickened with danger. Guns lifted higher, fingers tightening on triggers. She braced for the storm, expecting the bullets to tear through them both. She pressed her eyes shut, whispering a final prayer to a sky that had never answered. But the shots never came. Only angry shouts and heavy boots stomping closer. He did not flinch. He raised his weapon, not at her, but at his own comrades. Her breath caught in her throat. Madness. He was willing to fight them all for her. The other soldiers cursed, their anger rising, but hesitation held them back. None of them expected one of their own to turn. The standoff stretched like a blade between them, thin and ready to snap. Her hands shook violently. She could not understand it. Why would he choose her, a stranger, an enemy, over his own people? It made no sense. Yet when she met his eyes, steady and unyielding, she felt the answer without words. He had already made his choice. One soldier stepped closer, raising his gun to her head. Before she could even gasp, her protector lunged, knocking the weapon aside. The clash exploded into chaos, shouts, fists, the scrape of boots on stone. He fought not with fury, but with desperate strength, forcing them back, keeping their attention away from her. She could do nothing but watch, her body trapped between terror and awe. He bled, he staggered, but he never let them near her. And when silence finally returned, the other soldiers retreated, cursing, their eyes burning with anger and betrayal. He stood tall, chest heaving, his weapons still ready, his body shaking from the weight of what he had done. She stared at him, her lips trembling. The fear of death still hung in the air, but it was joined by something even more powerful. For the second time, she had braced for death. and for the second time his hand had taken it away. Only now she understood. The enemy she had been taught to despise was the only reason she still breathed. The night swallowed them as they slipped away from the ruins, his steps firm, hers unsteady but desperate to keep up. Behind them, the echoes of angry voices still lingered, the betrayal of his own comrades chasing them like ghosts. Every sound in the darkness made her heart race, yet every time she faltered, his hand was there, guiding her forward. They crossed through a field of broken machines, rusted metal rising like the bones of fallen giants. The stars above were sharp and cold, and the silence between them grew heavy. She wanted to ask why, to demand the truth of his madness, but when she opened her mouth, only shallow breaths escaped. He did not look at her, his eyes fixed ahead, his face carved with determination. Her people would call him a traitor. His people already did. By standing with her, he had severed himself from everything he knew. She could feel the weight of his decision pressing into every step. Yet he carried it without hesitation, as though her survival alone gave him strength. The thought unsettled her more than death ever had. When they reached a shattered bridge, he stopped and motioned for her to stay low. The faint hum of patrol drones floated in the distance. He crouched beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. His breath brushed against her ear as he whispered instructions. She nodded, her chest tight, her heart beating so loudly she feared the machines might hear it. They crawled beneath the remains of the bridge, pressing themselves into the earth as the drones passed overhead. She closed her eyes, waiting for the light to fall upon them, waiting for the sound of weapons to end it all. Instead, there was only silence, then the slow fading of engines. When she dared to look again, he was watching her, his eyes calm despite the danger. For a brief moment, her fear broke, and she felt something else, trust. Hours later, they stopped in the hollow of an old tree. Exhaustion pulled at her bones, but her mind refused rest. She studied him as he cleaned his blade with steady hands. His movements were precise, practiced, yet beneath them she saw a quiet weariness. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, a small laugh escaped her lips, soft and startled, as if her body had betrayed her. He looked up, surprised, and for the first time she saw something new in his expression, a flicker of light, almost like joy. The sound of her laughter seemed to soften the edges of his battle-hardened face. She covered her mouth quickly, ashamed, but the moment was already alive between them. For a heartbeat, the war outside felt distant. Her chest ached with the confusion of it. He was her enemy. She should hate him. Yet, each step beside him pulled her further away from the hatred she had carried all her life. She hugged his jacket tighter, closing her eyes against the storm in her heart. She could no longer tell if she was running from death or running toward him. The air was heavy with smoke when they reached the valley. Fires burned in the distance, and the ground shook with the rhythm of marching armies. They had nowhere left to run. His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths as he checked his weapon one final time. She stood close behind him, her hands trembling, not from fear of him anymore, but from the storm gathering all around them. The enemy appeared first, her own people, armored and armed, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Behind them came human soldiers, his comrades, weapons drawn and anger carved into their faces. Both sides converged like predators, and she felt the walls of death closing in. Trapped between two armies, she thought this was the end. Neither of them could escape. He stepped forward, standing tall, though blood stained his uniform. His voice carried across the valley, a single command for them all to stop. They shouted back, her people demanding her return, his people demanding her execution. He did not move. Instead, he reached behind him, taking her hand and pulling her gently into the open. Her heart lurched, her body stiff, but he did not let go. Every eye turned to them, and silence stretched like a blade. She felt her knees weaken, but his grip steadied her. She lifted her chin, her voice breaking as she spoke for the first time before them all. She told them what he had done, how he gave her water when she was dying, how he fought beasts and his own brothers to keep her alive. Her people stared at her as though she were mad, yet her words struck deeper than any blade. The soldiers on both sides shifted uneasily. No one fired. No one advanced. The image of a human and alien standing hand in hand was something neither side could understand. and it stole their courage. He raised their joined hands higher, his eyes defying all who watched, his stance daring them to try and tear them apart. Her chest filled with something fierce and unshakable. The fear that had ruled her for so long broke away, leaving behind only the truth. She was no longer alone, and she would never see him as her enemy again. If death came, it would come with them standing together. The crack of gunfire never came. The commanders barked orders, but the soldiers lowered their weapons one by one, unwilling to strike the pair before them. The valley fell into silence, the war trembling on the edge of something new. She looked at him through the haze of smoke and ash. The first time she had touched his hand, she had braced for death. Now she felt the same hand wrapped around her, strong and steady, carrying her into a future she could not yet name. And for the first time, she let herself believe that perhaps this gentle touch could change more than just her life.